So for those that don't know, on the left-hand side, please do interact with us. We want to make the session as interactive as possible. There are emojis, there are sounds that you can make, there are comments that you can provide. But if you've got comments or you've got questions, we can give you the floor as well. So we want to actually really make this relevant to the organizations that you work in. So if you've got any questions around what I'm talking about, if you've got any challenges, I'd love to be challenged around the subject as well. Please do let us know as well. And also, obviously, you can use the chat on the right-hand side. Plus, if you want to make any notes, you can do. And very helpful for me, you can mute yourself using M or unmute yourself doing the same thing as well. So let's get started. So in terms of the session itself then, so let's go back to just sharing my screen. You will see, hopefully now, my slides again. So just to introduce who I am. So I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at LearnAmp. Although that sounds very commercial, I actually spent most of my time in learning and development and talent development. So about 16 years in the space. And I was one of the people that set LearnAmp up as well. So just as a very quick introduction to who we are. So we refer to ourselves as a people development hub. And we basically weave together learning, community, and talent development into one solution that powers and increases performance around the organization. And the main thing for us is around enabling modern organizations to balance very much kind of people-led and also company-led training, or L&D, but also to very much align individual progression and what people want from their careers with what the collective goals are of the organization as well. And for us, those things are really important in terms of driving engagement and actually getting value from the system as well. So in terms of centralized and decentralized learning, what I thought I'd start with is a couple of definitions. So for us, centralized learning is all around central organized learning from L&D. So it's often delivered directly by L&D experts who have got great kind of understanding of things like learning taxonomies, of kind of different types of learning techniques and approaches. It's often a global and unified strategy. Priorities are often linked back up to the business. And there's quite a broad focus in terms of being able to provide as much value to as many people as possible. Often that means that it's a top-down approach, and consistency and quality are often considered really kind of key outputs in making sure that that experience to the end kind of audience is delivered in a consistent way. And it's often very structured. What we see in decentralized learning is very much that it's more about team trainers or SMEs, subject matter experts, getting involved in delivery. We have much more localized, but then also sometimes quite siloed strategies where things are delivered within regions or teams or departments. Often it's also linked more back to what that individual team or the individuals within the team need or what their requirements were. But it does mean that therefore it's more personalized, it's more bottom up, and it's quicker and more agile in the way that it can get delivered and it can get released out to the teams as well. And it's definitely in that respect less structured. So I'm just intrigued as to where you guys think that you sit as organizations in terms of how centralized your strategies are or how decentralized your strategies are. So I'm just going to stop again. We're going to just do a very quick poll around that in terms of where you guys think you sit on the scale. Would you say highly centralized, somewhat, balance of both, somewhat decentralized? Where do you guys sit on this scale? Cool. How are we doing in terms of the votes that are in?
Well, we're starting slow. People move over to their butter screen if that is possible. There is a
little poll on the left-hand side. Yeah, it'd be great to hear from you guys about where you kind of sit within the organization on this scale. Okay. So let's come back to this later and we can see what the results of this are as well. So if I come back in terms of talking about the kind of the story with Specsavers. So the reason that this was really important in thinking about a centralized and decentralized strategy is that where we started off with them is that they were very much struggling as an L&D department to be able to deliver the impact that they wanted across the organization. So they were being asked to do more, but with less resource. And in the backdrop of what we're seeing for L&D in terms of the challenges that they're having, we now live in an age of acceleration where things are moving all the time. So if you think about Gen AI becoming such a big topic in the last 6 months, for instance, and changing our priorities a huge amount, but just the amount of skills that are having to be constantly learned. So in the next 5 years, we think there's going to be another 25% shift in the amount of skills that are going to have to change within the modern organizational workplace. So having good systems and solutions to help with that is important, but also getting the organization more involved in a more decentralized way to support with that is also really critical. Employees' expectations have also changed a lot since the pandemic. There's now much higher expectations in terms of what kind of development and progression they're expecting, particularly we're seeing in younger generations entering the workplace as well. So having to think about how you personalize that experience for them and can demonstrate what offering you're giving to them so they can develop in your organization is becoming hugely important. We're also having to compete with a global market. So since we've had more hybrid and remote work, people aren't just constricted to being able to work with people down the road or in the country that they live in. They can actually work for lots of different global organizations as well. So again, keeping best in breed and making sure that you've got the most competitive offering out there from an L&D perspective is really, really important. And then lastly, this economic uncertainty that we're living in at the moment as well, we're seeing, unfortunately, lots of people kind of losing roles or budgets being restricted and L&D teams shrinking. And that's making it even more tricky in terms of how they're able to deliver against the strategic objectives. So previously, as we see it, L&D used to be very responsible for things like compliance and onboarding and also objectives and the performance of people across the organization. But in the last couple of years, particularly, there's been a much broader expectation of what L&D is all about. So we're now looked at in terms of being able to do things like workforce resistance. I've got things like employee wellness or DE&I that I'm starting to look at. We're having to think about things like employee engagement and knowledge management as well. So the L&D remit is definitely increasing, but sometimes that means that we're having, as I said, to do more with less. So there's increased pressure from senior leaders to make sure that the offering is competitive and that you're retaining really good talent, because lots of people aren't hiring at the moment. So making sure that you're reskilling, upskilling and retaining the talent you've got is hugely important. There's more demands from teams for support so that they can provide this more decentralized approach. And also L&D have got the issue that historically, at least, they've been having to deliver the full life cycle of everything within L&D itself as well. And there's still this movement where people are having to change the learner behavior so they're not so reliant on being spoon-fed. And a lot of that can be face-to-face or virtual delivery into being motivated to really develop themselves as well. So what we talk about a lot with our customers is how do we change our mindset? How do we move away from being the deliverers of all things into thinking of ourselves a bit more like product owners? And we love to think about that a lot at LearnAmp, which is the idea that our customers are our employees, they are our learners. And it's very similar to if you're taking a product to market. So instead of L&D being seen as having to be a team that does everything, can we move away from that? Whereas actually, instead of doing the needs analysis, you're actually using data much more to lead the analysis from the business. You're actually using systems to be able to identify through skills or performance management, performance development, what the needs analysis of the organization are so that teams can actually start to tell L&D what they need rather than L&D having to go and try and seek that. Also, that moves away from L&D being constantly having to work on the inbound requests that are coming from the organization, because they've got the data to back up what the actual priorities are of the organization around competence or how linked they are to the strategic objectives of the organization. Also, we're really trying to get people to move away from L&D being the only people that produce or create content. We've talked to businesses over the last couple of years where they say there's almost like a 6 month to 9 month wait sometimes in the pipeline to get content produced and out to the teams. Well, in the age that we live in, if that happens, things have changed and moved on. So it's almost out of date by the time it's getting released. So having the business actually being capable to create content themselves, to be able to facilitate, to be able to deliver sessions is really, really helpful. But you do need the right kind of setup and also the right kind of systems in order to support you to do that. And then lastly, it's how do you move away from L&D actually delivering the offering and much more thinking about shaping the offering sourcing where they can, or enabling the business to be able to deliver that offering, and then thinking more about how they market that offering out in order that they get people really engaged and they really understand how they can get the most from the L&D offering that's around as well. And moving away just from, you know, simple kind of assessment of an L&D session into being much more thinking about how do you prove the ROI to the business, so the business reinvests in L&D, and so you can be more innovative in your approaches as well. So this is something that we also like to talk to our customers about, which is what's the right journey that you take in order to get to this place where you've got a really alive, living culture and engaged community of learners as well. Now, this is only one journey. It's not the journey that everybody takes. But what we often see is, first off, you need to start from a place of having really good structure. So that's where the LMS and also the directed learning can really help. So around areas like pathways, learning pathways, or around the taxonomy of where the content sits and how well it's tagged and easy to find it is, making sure that you've got a structured kind of training and training delivery program available. After that, then you can start moving into actually encouraging people, because they see value in your offering, that they will start to then self-direct. And that's more of that kind of LXP mode that they're in at that point. But what really motivates learners, and it's two things that we often find. One is the collaboration with each other. So people generally prefer to learn from other peers or people similar to them because they understand their problems, they're speaking the same language, and they've got very relevant tips and advice that will help them to actually do their jobs better day to day. So that collaborative social piece can be really, really helpful. The other really key piece for us is about linking learning to progression. And we've got a white paper. Frances in our team, I actually didn't say hello to Frances before. She's going to be sharing a little bit in the chat as well, in terms of some of the things that we produce around these areas that we think could potentially be helpful to you as well. But if you can really get that link between what learning am I doing and how's that helping me to demonstrate to the business that I'm improving competence and I'm more valuable to the organization, therefore I should progress further, that can really, really help in terms of linking motivation for the learner as well. So coming on to Specsavers itself. So we went on a journey with them really 2.5 years ago now to start to decentralize the way in which they were running their learning and development offering. So where they started off with is they had 6 training centers across Australia. They had about 5,000 employees at that time. They've now got about 9,500 employees. They've seen huge growth in the last couple of years that we've been working with them. So it's become even more important that they've moved away from this model where people have been traveling to go to training centers in order to get trained up, which often is really high cost, but also you can only go to training centers only so often as well. Also, they only had a real kind of pushed LMS type offering, which is more about mandatory training. It wasn't really encouraging or motivating people with the types of content that was interesting to them and that was actually helping them to be able to deliver their roles better as well. And they were finding the same challenge that I was talking about earlier, whereby things were moving on so fast, they were really struggling to be able to keep up with those trends and the shifting regulations that they had in the space, as well as the skills that were required in order for people to do their role well. So it's high cost, it had limited personalization and agility, and also because they didn't have a solution that was kind of mobile enabled, it wasn't accessible all the time. So people were struggling to be able to basically use the kind of products and offerings they had at times that they wanted to. What we've actually seen since is people are doing things in their lunch breaks. They're sometimes doing it on the way to work or after as well, because they're actually genuinely finding the content interesting and helpful to them as well. So we took this approach with them where we said, from a cultural perspective, you can't move from people being spoon-fed and being used to being delivered learning and development to a much more free-flowing, open, decentralized model. People just aren't ready for it. They need to be taken on that journey as well. So we thought about what the right change management process was, and we wanted to really get them to adapt to building this culture whereby instead of learning living with L&D centrally, they had this big kind of philosophy that they wanted to introduce was about learning, living in the stores themselves. And Specsavers is actually a bit of a kind of franchise model. So it was really important for them that they had the stores having the flexibility, autonomy and tools to be able to really kind of develop the people at a more localized level as well. So first off, what we decided is we were going to provide the same kind of solution they had before, but improved in a more centralized way. So more of that LMS functionality, but they wanted to do that in a better way. They wanted to improve what that current offering looked like. Then what we did is we looked to decentralize by starting to empower and build capability within the actual leaders and the subject matter experts within the stores themselves. So that was our land phase. And then the third phase was about expansion, which is then from there, once we've got managers involved in the process, local subject matter experts and trainees involved, the motivation with learners massively went up as well. There's so many stats to suggest that managers being involved in L&D or your coaches has a huge impact in terms of learner engagement as well. So it was really critical that we got those stakeholders involved and actually doing a lot more of the delivery. So in phase one, the improvement of centralisation, the first thing we did is actually we remapped the taxonomy of all of the content. So we could actually build a kind of a globe. It was like a kind of planet of content where we could really decide where does everything sit? How do people navigate that content? Again, think of about like a product owner, a bit like your website. You know, how do people find what they need to get to? How do they self-serve themselves and understand actually what's available in order that they can actually then go and start to use your product? We also started to centralize how learning impact was measured across all the stores so that we could really check that there was a consistency and approach around this. And also we really worked on the branding of the product itself and how we could build awareness so that people felt like things had shifted, that they weren't just the same, that this was a really different offering and that they were expected to also behave in a different way here as well. So this is just an example of the learning journey that was created by us and Specsavers, building out this kind of world of learning in terms of where different stuff sat, customer journey, products and offerings, how they dispense their products, what their processes were. Sorry, I've gone back. And then we really mapped that against the actual learning pathways and the types of ways that the actual content library was structured as well. Lucy, you've got a question around how long do these stages take? Absolutely brilliant question. So if we go back to those 3 stages, the first phase, which is about centralisation, we mostly did within the implementation phase. So we looked at what they already had with their existing system, and then we looked at what improvements we could make, but also how we could make it feel similar. So there was a connection between what they were used to what they were still going to be experiencing, but with some really nice kind of improvements in experience and more clarity around how to search for things, what was available, and improving the overall look and feel and experience for the learners as well. Then that next phase, which is about building competency and capability within the stores, pretty much took us the rest of that first year. And then we moved into stage 3 in the start of the second year, which is more about this expansion into really providing more innovative and exciting offerings so that we drove that self-driven aspects of the platform as well. Does that answer the question? I know you can get on, we can actually have you speak if you'd like to speak as well.
Oh yes, I'm not too familiar with Butter either, so I wasn't too sure how to unmute myself. But yeah, no, that does help. I was just, when I saw it, I thought, I'm sure that's a longer term intervention and partnership that you would have gone with Specsavers, because it's not something that you can quickly kind of implement. So yeah, that's why I was curious about.
Definitely. And we get asked this all the time as well. Like, if you want to move, how quickly can you expect to move into slightly more decentralized, or when's my learning culture going to be up and running?
Yeah.
And culture takes time, doesn't it? So we really thought about how long did each stage need so that people could start to ease into this kind of new reality for them. And then we started to see the engagement flowing from there. We've now started working with them in their 4th year. So we're kind of now moving on to other things, which I'll come on to later in this deck as well.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question as well? How did you convince them to kind of commit to that longer term partnership as well? Because I know that it's a bit, people want things quickly. They want it yesterday. They want a quick fix, cheap, quick. Of
course.
Curious on how.
I tell you what it was. What we actually agreed was what the measures were. So we said with each section, we're only going to move on to the next phase once we've proven that we've actually delivered against phase 1. So I think quite often what we can do in projects is we can kind of estimate what we think we're going to do. But ultimately, if your number one priority hasn't been met, then don't move on to number two. And I think there's kind of a discipline, I suppose, almost sticking with what you're trying to achieve, proving that you've achieved it, and then moving on to the next phase. So we had a sense of timelines, which we were pretty close to, actually, I'd say. But it was really important for us that we didn't move on until we felt that we had achieved in each phase.
Cool, thank you.
Pleasure. Great question. Thank you very much for your involvement. Cool. Okay, so the translation of that taxonomy, as I said, not just it being kind of ethereal or I suppose academic, but really then thinking about how to translate that back into a way that could look similar in terms of this world of learning within LearnAmp itself, and using kind of improved iconography, using different types of tools that we've got really helped with that as well. The other thing that we talk about a lot is, and I think everybody knows this, but whether we really kind of live and breathe this, is how much are we doing around marketing and communication as well. So we thought a lot about, and again, kind of going back to your point, Lucy, we did a lot of work in the months leading up to launch. I think it took us about 4 months in the end, because it was a big project with lots of data they had to migrate and stuff like that. But we used that time to drip feed content in, and we thought about, how do we build this awareness? So early on, we actually did some very kind of high level, guess what's coming type stuff that people didn't really know what the detail was. So over time, we started to expand out what was coming, so that it kind of built that level of engagement and excitement over time as well. So I'll just play you a little bit of the video that we created with them at the start.
A long, long time ago, well, 2013, we brought you iLearn. Now, in a new world of technology, we introduce to you iLearn. Huh? Okay, we introduce to you a new and improved iLearn. Welcome to your new home of learning. An iLearn that is easier for you, that both guides you on a journey and helps you locate more amazing resources.
So hopefully that just gives you a bit of a flavor. But that marketing campaign that we thought about, that happened both in videos, it happened through the social tools that they're already using internally, but also thinking about the kind of mailers that were going out. But we also really thought about the personas that we were trying to market to as well. So thinking about the different messages that there would be to a store manager and what their involvement in this kind of new process or new reality was going to look like, what this meant for managers, what this meant for subject matter experts. We really kind of created those differentiated communications, and that really helped us in terms of having the impact that we wanted to have at the very start as well. So that was a big part of the centralisation and improving the way that we were actually communicating about the offering. Then basically we started to think about this decentralisation. So it was really important that we upskilled the leader population. I talked already about just how important it is to have them on board, leading from the top and really making sure that they were behind the initiative, empowering them to be able to themselves drive learning in stores. So what I mean by that is doing things like running their own training sessions within LearnAmp, running kind of sharing content, assigning, actually working and putting time aside for people to build out their personal development plans with their managers. And also really trying to get people to be in a habit of actually sharing expertise and having a way to be able to do that really effectively and easily as well. So in this phase, just to give you a couple of examples, one of the things that we've got in LearnAmp is the ability to be able to take videos or do podcasts or kind of share screen, record, and then have them uploaded, so that the knowledge that was being shared was through the champions, not through L&D. So they had loads more people in store, sharing store to store, breaking those silos down and sharing information that was actually helping them to improve and deliver for their customers across all of their different regions as well. So these in-store trainers started to take on about 90% of the actual learning that was happening within those stores as well, which is really great to see. What we also had is that we were giving leaders the tools to actually be able to do that assessment of learning themselves, rather than, again, kind of outsourcing that to L&D. We had the ability, basically, so this is actually an optometry kind of learning journey that used to be created kind of on paper and done face-to-face. And instead, what we started to do is we created learning activities which had exercises whereby having done the in-store training or having done a piece of content, they would then be asked to then submit what their reflections were, or to do a self-record kind of role play of demonstrating their improvement around that competency area, or uploading something that they were working on that they could give to a customer, for instance. And you can see that by doing that, that was then kind of pass failed. You could give feedback, you could do little voice notes or kind of WhatsApp type videos or voice notes to each other. So again, trying to give the tools, the right kind of tools that people are used to, that they use almost in their everyday life, like WhatsApp, to encourage them to have more of this back and forth. And this was really helpful also because people worked on shifts. So the ability to do this async and to do this whether you're at home, whether you're in the office, sometimes like regional trainers would be able to support people as they were moving between stores, became really, really helpful in terms of encouraging that decentralized, not just learning, but also assessment of impact in the platform as well. And then one of the things that we kind of evolved from there was this concept of how do people just learn peer-to-peer? So the leadership program that used to be delivered by externals and also by L&D started to change into a development program led by actual leaders within the organization. So what you're seeing here is huddles, which were like podcasts or were videos, which would actually be delivered directly by these experts or by the regional kind of managers or leaders. And then within there, you would use things like the comment feeds, and they did fun things around like almost like Dragon Den type ideas where they could kind of share stuff with each other and they could kind of vote on what the right ideas were as well. So again, trying to create more of that kind of bottom-up approach. People, as I said, really like to learn from people who understand their problems, can provide very practical advice in language that they understand, but also encourage them to want to get more involved as well so that they could also be recognized for what they know and what their contribution could be within that community as well. Lucy, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, sure. Sorry, it's another question, but I'm curious about the reason I'm asking this question is because when I worked for another company years ago, we used an LXP and we used that same functionality where we wanted users to create their own content for everyone and to fill themselves, to share X, Y, and Z ideas, podcasts, and so on. And we struggled to motivate employees to do that. For one, the video, maybe because it was a long time ago, the video bit is really cringy for some people. Some people don't want to film themselves.
Yeah,
don't have the right setup to do so. So yeah, how do you motivate, and how also do you monitor the quality? What if it's really bad?
Great question. So in terms of that, managing that change, I think, again, you need tools that help you to do that. So there are some systems in the space that kind of almost go, right, let's just decentralize everything. Everybody can create content. Let's just share and see what happens. I just don't think that works, because if stuff's in the platform that's not good enough quality, or it's duplication, or it maybe is even maybe a little bit inappropriate, or it's not accurate, people lose confidence, and they lose confidence in the product at that point, not just the content. So what we've got is people are encouraged to be able to create content. But when they create content, it has to go through to either localized curators, which could be like in-store trainers or subject matter experts, or it could be the actual L&D team themselves, who would then review the content and then could write back. And if they wanted someone to update or change something, you could have that kind of, again, a bit like WhatsApp, back and forth in terms of improving the content. But then they could basically approve it. Once the content gets approved, the individual who created the content then gets their photo and name on the content. So they got the kind of kudos and recognition for having created that content. And also they can be made the expert on that content as well. So if anyone's got a question, it would ping to the person that created it so they could answer the question and then have that kind of real time back and forth. So that's the way that we manage the quality side of it. If then somebody was clearly really good at what they did and they were delivering on a regular basis, we would then actually just make them a curator, and then we could just have that confidence they were freely going to create good content and kind of contribute without having to have that kind of filtration or kind of handbrake on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's one part of it. I think the second part of it is how much do we really care about this happening? And if we care about it happening, why do we make it part of the actual progression framework? You know, instead of everyone having to be a linear go through the management layers, and that's the way that you progress, and that's the way that you kind of get recognized and rewarded in your role. How about we actually start to make sure that these things are the things that sit within the progression framework? So if you're sharing your knowledge and you value that as an organization and don't want it to be siloed or people to hold on to knowledge, I'd make that part of your actual framework. And that's part of, in our white paper, when we talk about linking learning to progression, a big part of motivating people to share is wanting them to be more recognized for the knowledge they have. And actually, I do think there's a lot of people out there that do want to be like that. Or if not, they want to be motivated because they want to feel like they're developing and they're being seen as more expert within the organization. But that does need to be linked somewhat back to their own progression plan, I think, and their own reward for doing that as well.
And thank you. And last question, and I promise I'll shut up.
No, it's very good.
Did you train the curators or like give them tips or whatever to how to do a quick, expert, concise video on?
Yeah, exactly that. So in our solution, we've got templates, and within the templates, we've got some examples, but we've also got some tips. Things like make sure that you've got your light on so people can see your face, or make sure it's only 3 minutes, because any longer than that, people kind of start to, clock off. The ability to be able to do like quick retakes so that they kind of have psychological safety and feel like they, could get the best version of themselves, like what people do on TikTok, right? Or, I mean, I'm too old on TikTok, but Instagram, whatever, you wait until you've got the right version and then you share it. We've started to see people like Metro Bank that we work with, who I don't think they'll mind me saying, at the very start when they started working with us, were very formal around the kind of content they created. They're now creating kind of, people recording themselves with flashcards and doing very much that kind of TikTok type content. I think it's something I was going to talk about at the end. Part of also doing that, moving more toward this approach, is also this idea that you need to let go of everything being perfect. Sometimes good enough is more than enough. And actually creating more agility in content means you need to not reduce content, but be less precious about exactly what it looks like, so that you can create more content at scale to be able to keep up with the moving times of the organization as well. Cool. Okay. So next part for us is just then, so what was the early impact for this? So because we had done that work around the engagement, and also because you were getting lots more support from the actual leadership team itself, we started to see early on that leaders were actually creating tasks, which are like assignments. So within the first month, we saw nearly 9,000 tasks, well, 8,500 tasks being set by the managers themselves within the stores, which they'd completely never had any control to do before. So they were really enjoying getting part of that process. We were then also seeing that we had 91% active users during that month as well. Now, fair enough, it's the first month, but it's a pretty strong launch in terms of kind of getting people in, feeling like there was value for them, and actually staying on. So on average, people were spending 43 minutes in that first month. And remember, this is a retail environment, right? So they don't get huge amounts of time to go on. So we were really happy with the amount of time that they were in there, just kind of getting used to the system as well. And there was a 94% increase in completions during that first month as well. Over the first year, we started to see high levels of capability, increased engagement, and crucially, and this kind of, tying some of the threads together as well, how does L&D save time, win back time, so that you can be more strategic, so that you can have a bigger impact across the whole organization, rather than getting stuck in delivery mode where sometimes you never get outside of induction, onboarding, or compliance, and maybe getting onto your leadership program. So freeing themselves up to be able to do more was really important. So you can see at the bottom in terms of kind of some of the actual savings. Most of those was around efficiency in terms of actually having to reduce the amount of people that they had that were delivering some of this stuff, but also around kind of travel costs were looked at that as well. But we started to see some really nice things about some huge increases in having this more self-serve model, which was more personalized. We were seeing new hires getting up to time to competence 47% quicker. And the stores were starting to see the impact, and therefore they were all signing up to wanting to have an in-store trainer. And also it's starting to have and digging into the kind of employee attrition rates, which was a kind of strategic goal for the organization as well. So that was first year. After first year, we started to go, great, we started to win back some of this time now. What do we do with that? So L&D started to think about how they could be much more innovative and how they could deliver more one-to-many content or experiences that could be delivered at scale, but still feel engaging and also personalized. And also crucially, how do they start linking this back to competencies so that people could start to use this as, we like to talk about skills, a bit like the kind of currency in which employees are being able to communicate to the organization around their worth and value, but also that the organization is able to set expectation for the employee around what's required of them in their role and what they have to do in order to be able to progress next as well. And that really does drive motivation, because ultimately, as human beings, we have a need to want to move forward and to want to progress and to be recognized for that as well. And, more money always helps as well. And then also it's about building communities of learning. So now we've got out of this mode of managers having to drive this. Can we take this even further, where we could get community managers and we could have individuals driving a lot more of those communities themselves? So just as an example of some of the content that the L&D team were freed up to create, they started to think about this. So how could they create more content that was more kind of psychologically safe for people to be able to practice their interactions with customers, to learn about the new products being released in an environment which was away from the customers. So for new hires, they loved it because they weren't having to do this in front of a manager watching, or in front of a live customer. They were being able to practice some of this before they actually got out. So really helping with that kind of job readiness, but also just allowing them to go back sometimes, being able to learn at their own speed rather than having to learn at the same time as others. It really, really started to help. So yeah, that was just an example of some of the kind of innovation that we saw them being able to deliver once they had more freed up time to look at other types of sources that were out there that they could use. So I know that we're kind of 35 minutes in, starting to wrap up a little bit, and then love to have some more questions or debate from you guys in the room. So the key takeaways for us really are, L&D or Specsavers really responded to the macro picture. They recognized that they were struggling with the tools that they had, and also with the resource that they had to be able to deliver what they needed to meet the organization's needs at scale. So they started to move away from being that deliverer into being more like product owners. And they really started to think about, where does learning currently sit within their organization and where do they want it to sit? So that idea, that philosophy about living in stores, we've all got an example of that, right? Whether that's in a particular team or a particular office, how can we start to just release some of that in the things that are safe to release as well? Centralisation, it was about assessing first what worked, what didn't work, creating the right framework for success, improving awareness and marketing, and then also agreeing on what was the best way to measure impact and how to measure that. Decentralisation was a lot around upskilling and empowerment, providing the right tools both to the individuals and the teams, and also about kind of having more local delivery through SMEs, but ensuring that L&D was there as that kind of quality control, sitting in, looking at what is being delivered, and being more the kind of facilitators, the orchestrators, rather than the deliverers or the kind of the trumpet players. And then the learning culture, a lot of that was around for them building new habits. It was around linking learning to progression, building more community where people could learn from each other, like the leadership community that I showed, and also making sure that they could really prove the ROI so that they could get future investment to do more innovation as well. So yeah, interested to hear where you guys maybe think that you are on this scale. For us, we don't think centralisation or decentralisation is right or better than the others. We always hear this thing around in the industry, like death of the LMS, or the LMS is not the right tool to use anymore, or LXPs, long live the LXP. In truth, you need a balance of all of these things. It's about what's the right balance to have between L&D being involved where they can support most, but also making sure that you can give away as much as possible to the business to get them really engaged and to benefit from the value that they can provide to the overall L&D offering here as well. If you do just sway on one side or the other, what we often see is L&D getting caught up in managing the full life cycle. They become time poor, they're always firefighting, they're chasing, and they're just generally being able to focus on the more mandatory types of stuff. To decentralised, and maybe Lucy, this is kind of to the point you said, things happen in silos, there's inconsistency or duplication, there's too much risk because things aren't being well managed from a quality perspective, and it's a bit of a wild west. It's not easy to find things. The right stuff might not be there when you need. People lose confidence as well. So I think having that balance. Great. Everyone's balanced. We love it. Okay. Well, I'm really glad that you guys all kind of agree with us in terms of getting that right as well. The last thing for me, sorry, as a parting idea, is if you haven't started on this approach, as I was saying and I've already kind of said it really, but I really would encourage people to think about what is the right level of quality, making sure that you can produce short form content. You know, I think again, during the pandemic years, we all started to use things like our recorded kind of videos and stuff much more. It's more human in some ways. It doesn't have to be perfect. Move away from e-learning. You know, not everything has to be created in SCORM or e-learning modules. I think that's great for certain things. And it can be helpful when you're doing really big one-to-many stuff. But a lot of the times you want to create an MVP. You want to be experimental. You want to see what works, what doesn't. If it works, great, you can create a better version. But really try and stay more agile in terms of how you do that. And then again, how do you motivate your subject matter experts, a bit like Lucy was asking, to make sure that they contribute? So hopefully we've kind of talked about that a little bit today as well. So yeah, I'm going to just ask if anyone's got any comments or questions, but I can see that some people are leaving the room as well. So if you want to grab this before you go out, you can do a quick QR code of the white paper that we've got related to decentralisation as well. Also, if you visit our website, we've got quite a lot around things like linking learning to progression and talking more practically about how some of our customers have actually gone around delivering some of these strategies in their organisations as well. Ying, I'd love to know how to open provided links. Oh, sorry. Is that a question, Stefan, that you can help with? How do people get into the links?
That is a good question. I just opened one and I found myself in another tab. So for me, that works the same way.
Okay, fine. Well, hopefully, maybe try again, Ying, and see if that actually does come through. Lucy, how do we measure time to productivity? Great question. I think this is different for every organization, and it's definitely different in each role as well. So, you know, someone in sales versus somebody in tech support versus, you know, in our organization, for instance, the engineers want to get straight into the code and start building straight away. They're not going to wait 3 months, but they don't need as much knowledge. So ultimately, it's about understanding first off, what does good look like? And what's that level of expected performance so that you can start to benchmark when people have actually got there. But then also you need to make sure that through that induction onboarding program, you're making sure you've got the right measures in place. So week on week, not just at the end of the process, you're starting to actually measure whether people are moving toward that. One of the things that we do at LearnAmp, and we talk a lot to our customers about, is when you're hiring new people, are you creating success plans for them? Do they know what the first 6 months needs to look like and what success and what measures they're aiming for from the very get-go? Or are you kind of introducing that later into the process? When I was at my old business that I worked in for 9 years, 10 Group, we actually used to benchmark this as well. So the reason we benchmarked it is we said, right, if we have 2 weeks, let's say, of induction onboarding, how quickly does it take for people to hit this milestone in terms of their performance? Then I asked the business for more time and I said, well, look, if you can give me 3 weeks, I reckon I can get these people more up to speed, feeling more confident, more comfortable. I reckon they'll actually perform quicker by having more time up front. And that's what we started to see. So it's about finding that balance of like, well, how much time do you need up front so people can really understand what they need to do, have the time to practice, understand the organization properly so that they can perform. And then you need to have those measures in place so that you can track that and then start experimenting with, well, how much time do I need in that initial phase so that I can get them coming into that kind of ideal performance phase as quickly as possible as well. So yeah, that's what I would suggest around that. Did you want to kind of go back into that at all, Lucy? That makes sense? Happy? Okay, cool, great. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, if I could. Joe, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm noticing a lot of transferability here in your approach for Specsavers. I was wondering if have you seen any other good examples of decentralized ownership that had any added value to business?
Definitely, yeah. So we've seen lots of different businesses use this in different ways. I think the leadership program's a really, really nice one as an example. If you can have communities whereby people can feel safe to be able to learn from each other synchronously, as they're going through something like a leadership program. The ability to be able to share assets or videos that they find peer-to-peer, it can really, really help. So for instance, again, in our platform, but I'm sure lots of other platforms will allow you to do this as well, or MS Teams, are you creating spaces where people can share insights, ask questions, and have that psychological safety? I think that's really, really key to building that kind of decentralized approach that gets people engaged. But also, you've got to be innovative in terms of the way you might think about this. So again, one of the things my old business did is they did, instead of Dragon's Den, they did Dragon's 10. And they used the software as a way that people could submit ideas through the surveys. And then they would do a live session, and people within the live session would be able to use the comments and the discussion as a way to be able to act like dragons in terms of interrogating people's ideas. And it was a great way to get people to actually think about how to improve the L&D offering, but also how to improve the business and really get people, you know, how do you translate some of these things that we used to do face-to-face into a kind of more virtual way that people can engage in a similar way as well. It's really about creating community. And since we now work in a more kind of hybrid and remote reality, we're having to just redesign some of these approaches to think about how to do them where people might be, in different spaces. Nice. Any other questions from the floor? No?
You know, I just I'm seeing Lucy typing something, so as that is coming in, I'm curious though.
Oh,
please,
sorry. No. Sorry, Stefan. I was just saying that I was going to go, and I heard you speaking, and I interrupted. Apologies. I just want to say thank you. It was really interesting, so thank you for sharing, and thank you for hosting the session as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the great involvement. Really helpful.
Absolutely. I can only imagine that coming from a very classic and traditional organization with HR and L&D included in there, and it all being centralized, moving away from that can feel like losing control.
Definitely.
How do you think that we can approach that? What are your suggestions?
I think it goes back to what we talked about before. It's about pace. Businesses don't have to move at the same pace. You know, I think you just need to recognize what's the right pace for your organization. We work with some businesses, for instance, who have got people that don't have the same level of digital literacy that other businesses do. They don't have as much time on screen. They don't interact with apps in the same way that other people do. So I think understanding the pace of each organization where you're at, and understanding and trying to really think about what is your journey for change is really important. I think if you try and do things too quick, then people feel uncomfortable, it doesn't work, and you never go back to and try it again. So it's almost better to kind of put the feelers out there and try and gently change and tweak the culture. So again, as an example of what I was talking about with the user-generated content, can you do it in a way which gives you comfort that people are encouraged to do this, rather than opening up and just letting it all happen at the same time? A shout out to one of our partners that we work with, StoryTagger. Have got a really great tool to allow, it kind of coaches people about how to present themselves, to give them the confidence that anybody can actually present really nicely, with some quite structured advice around, you know, how you actually think about the narrative of what you want to say, and how do you approach it with kind of recording. So even CEOs of businesses, we find sometimes they're so used to standing in front of people and talking, but when they then have to go on camera and they have to create some content, that can be really tricky sometimes. So I think sometimes it's also about us as L&D thinking about our role being more about that upskilling piece. How do we encourage people gently and encourage and kind of coach them to feel confident to get more involved? And I think that can be really important. Otherwise, if they're left to do that themselves, often people will kind of shy away from that because they feel a bit exposed. Great. Alison, thank you. Yes, Alison, I think well, I'm not sure if you've got a video actually, but there's lots of great examples on the StoryTagger website, which I know Francis just posted in to go and have a look. They're brilliant tool, super helpful team as well in terms of being able to encourage more of that kind of storytelling to happen across the organization, which can really then start to encourage that flow of kind of content creation as well. And Anna, thank you very much for joining as well.
All right, let's give another moment for people to perhaps drop a question if they have them. They want to have them answered in the session here. If not, I'm very sure and positive that we can offer a link to you, Joe, by email or by LinkedIn, where you can always be reached. Would that be fine for you?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Very happy. Please do get in touch with me, get in touch with us as a business. We'd love to hear from you. I think one of the things about us at LearnAmp is a lot of us have worked in L&D and talent development, so we're really happy to share ideas and thoughts. And so even if you just want to kind of get in touch and ask ideas or just to share some information, we're very happy to do that. We very much care about the space, and we want to contribute as positively as we can. And there's my links in LinkedIn if anyone wants to get in touch with me directly as well.
There we go. All right. Considering there's no typing anymore, I just want to thank you, Joe, for having this session with us. I definitely learned a lot, and I'll be tagging some colleagues of mine to come check it out and how they can transfer that for community management and other areas as well. I think there's a lot to be learned from your approach. I do wish you a wonderful afternoon, and everybody else a great rest of your day, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, and hope to catch you next time for Thought Lab.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Until then, have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.